At Simio, we're in the business of showing you the future. Our intelligent technology gives you unprecedented insight into complex systems to identify and solve today's inefficiencies and tomorrow's challenges. The Simio solution provides a low-risk opportunity to drive transformational change. Our true digital twin models capture all the constraints, business rules, and decision logic that define the operation of your system. When powered by your data, easily evaluate unlimited scenarios and deliver optimized solutions. No matter what industry you're in, eliminate your greatest operational process and scheduling challenges with a Simio digital twin. See your future success, Simio.
Perfect. Welcome, everyone, to the Simio Solution Series. My name is Dan Vasilini. Presenting today is going to be Adam Sneath. He will take over here shortly. Just as we go through the presentation today, a couple things I'd like to go through here at the beginning. You will see the QR code pop up a few times during my intro presentation here. If you are watching this video or watching this on record, obviously the QR code will be active as well. You can feel free to click it. We're just looking for some feedback on our sessions as we go through here. Today's session obviously is a Wednesday. Normally we do our sessions on Friday. So some of the feedback we had received was trying a different day of the week because Fridays sometimes seem to be days off for people or end of the week and not a great time for the session. So we're holding a session here on Wednesday. Our next two sessions are also scheduled for Wednesdays to close out the year with. To see how things change throughout the actual live attendance. Obviously, we'd love to have folks here live because the live Q&A that goes through is I think, most valuable when people are able to ask questions as we're going through versus watching the recording and just kind of living with the questions that have been asked or that were asked during the live session. All right, so a couple slides on my side. Once again, I am Dan Vasilini, Vice President of Global Sales over here at Simio. Adam Sneath is going to be doing most of the presenting today. Housekeeping items before we get started, please be aware that today's session is being recorded for replay purposes. If you'd like to rewatch this session or refer it on to a colleague or a friend, we will have the session, a link to this session live or soon live on our website. With us doing this on a Wednesday, we'll probably have this thing live by midday tomorrow. Normally when we do it on Friday, it would be live by Monday, but we'll do our best to have this thing up on the webpage by tomorrow so that you can go through and watch it again. Or if you're not able to be here the whole time and if you want to go back and watch something, it'll be there for you. Please also be aware everyone will be coming the session today on mute. If you have a question you'd like to ask today during the session, somewhere on your screen, on my side of the screen, it's on the right-hand side, there is a GoToWebinar dashboard. Within that dashboard, there is a question box or a question drop down. That's where you would ask your question during today's session. If you have a question during the session, please feel free to type it in there. We also try to leave time at the end for Q&A for questions that don't get asked or questions that are best to be asked at the end. If your question does come in during the session and it's very relevant to something Adam's talking about, I'll try to break in and ask the question at that point in time. Or if your question is more generic in nature, we'll hold it off until the end. Adam's presentation today is scheduled for about 30 to 40 minutes. And so we have done our best to try to leave time at the end for Q&A. As I mentioned earlier, we have two more sessions scheduled for 2023, Wednesday, October the 4th and Wednesday, November the 8th. I specifically note Wednesday here just simply because of the change in day versus the Friday that we normally hold it on. So about a month from now or a little less than a month from now, we'll be doing chart designer enhancements. And then in November, we're going to talk about DDMRP, design implementation and operation, something relatively new that I think most people will be interested in. So those will be the next two sessions that are on the calendar. Please feel free to sign up anytime you'd like. There are links on our website to get signed up now. Once again, there's the QR code in the top right-hand corner there. So if you wouldn't mind filling out some survey information by clicking on that QR code either now or after the session ends. And I will pop up this thank you slide one more time at the end for one last view at the QR code. And I also will probably pop it back up one more time so that you have a link or an email address for Adam and I when we get to that point. Otherwise, that's my part of the presentation today. Adam, I will change things over to you, and you are live.
Sounds great. Thanks, Dan. Just get started, share my screen.
And a quick sound check, you sound good so far.
All right. Screen looks okay as well. See my slides?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Well, let's do this thing. Hey, everyone, thanks for joining. I think this is really a fun topic, a topic that I'm personally passionate about as someone who presents the software a lot, usually through demonstrations. So we'll be talking about enhancing our models with animation, and sort of the tee up here is I want to bring my models to life with just enough animation. The reason we say that is that, like anything in Simio, there's a cost associated with adding more to the model development. But when it comes to animation, I like to think about adding just enough to do a couple of things. First of all, add interpretability to your model. So as engineers, we realize that when you're presenting this to someone else, there's a lot of new concepts and a lot that we're trying to convey with the model. So just like making good PowerPoint slides, if you can use visual tools or use the animation features in Simio to make that easier for yourself, that's great. And we'll show you how to do that in our session. I believe that adding just enough animation can also bolster your claim from an analytical perspective. So personally, I think most of the value from the model comes from the analytical aspects, the experiments that you're running, validating the process. But being able to really show them that bottleneck, right? Or if we automate this area, if we add AGVs, what that would really look like can be great as well. So that'll be our focus. That's our scope. What will we be discussing? Just a couple bullet points here. I'm going to cover a fair amount in kind of quick snippets, but we'll talk about adding and manipulating 3D symbols, adjusting queue configurations. So queues may be attached to a server where parts are being processed. We'll also look at parking queues where workers are sort of hanging out around the work area while they're seized to work on the part. We'll also add named view hotkeys, a great, super easy feature to make presenting the model much easier. Camera sequence and tracking. We'll also hit auto creating links at the end, and some other things will be mixed in there as well. So what's our strategy? And overall, my approach to animation is sort of leaving it for the end. I focus on getting the technical details into the model, making sure that I'm comfortable with the objects that I'm using, the servers, the combiners, what have you, before I start applying skins to them, because you can add interpretability with animation from sort of a bird's eye view or a stakeholder view, but as the modeler, you almost lose a little bit of interpretability because now your server looks like a lathe. It doesn't look like a server anymore. So you can, I think if I do that too fast before I'm really comfortable with the model, it can get a little confusing for me. It's like adding a lot of comments in your code. Now you got to sort of sift through all the comments, right? But once we get to animation and adding this, maybe we've built our model, we feel good about the model where it is, then we're going to sort of beautify. So a couple steps you may follow are adding a floor plan and building the model in the facility view to scale. So we'll do that. Then we'll animate work areas and resources to make them look more realistic. Movement, transportation, material handling as well. We'll show you some nice features to animate those. And also static symbols that maybe aren't attached to an object, just a piece of scaffolding or if you were doing a business process, you might put a plant in the corner of the room, right? Just static symbols that we can bring in to add more real feel. So that's what we're going to cover. And to get us started, I will now switch over to the software. And I'll assume my screen share looks good on the audience view, but just chime in if there are any technical issues here.
Looks good, Adam.
Wonderful. All right, so we've got a relatively simple system here with some upstream processing activities, downstream storage areas with our rack objects, but you can see that I haven't done much to animate this. So some labels and status plots have been added. I'm not going to cover those today because those will be covered in our next solution series that Kiara is going to present. So I think they'll be a nice complement to each other, especially with the new chart designer features we've added. So I won't cover those today, but I think you'll be hopefully impressed by the end of our session in just 20-30 minutes how different this model will look, because we're going to add animation to a lot of the objects, some of the entities, workers. We're going to mess around with the queues. So we'll do a lot here in not too much time. So first thing I want to point out to you is this symbols, these ribbons at the top, symbols and attached animation. So you'll notice that those don't always appear, right? But when I click on an object, I see those appear. So to get us started, we are going to just add some skin to servers 2, 3, and 4 from our built-in symbol library. So we'll start, again, select each object, go to our symbols ribbon, apply symbol. We'll do a lathe, a mill, maybe we'll call this a finishing area, and then you can adjust the size of these symbols sort of independent to the attached nodes and queues, so you can resize those as needed. So already just with a few clicks, we've gone from sort of the gray box, the standard server, to a work area that looks like a machine or a piece of equipment. And to really illustrate this, I've gone down into 3D just by hitting the 3 key on my keyboard. So you can quickly toggle between 2 and 3D with the 2 and 3 keys on your keyboard. So now that we've got sort of realistic looking equipment, our Lego block workers look a bit out of place. So next we'll take a crack at the workers and add some animation to them as well. So same workflow, I'll select that worker instance, use my symbol library, scroll down towards the bottom, and I want to point out that there are sort of 2 flavors of symbols for worker objects typically. So you have these categories that say animated, and then if we can find it here, you'll have a larger category that's not animated. And we're going to use animated, and I'll show you sort of what the impact of doing that is. So we'll grab a sort of human symbol here from one of those animated categories, resize it a little bit, and we're also going to work on, so let's just run and see what happens now by default, right? I can see the worker sort of the feet are really moving while they're walking around. So that's the difference between those animated human symbols and the non-animated. Non-animated, they would just sort of shuffle about without their feet actually moving. So the animated symbols are a nice way to get, again, more real feel for those workers sort of moving around through the facility. And what are they doing in the model right now? So I have this server 2 set up to request move for those workers to the input node of server 2. I also am using an option called park while busy. That's really nice. So you'll see when more than one worker is required, they'll sort of stack on each other. And I only have a capacity of 1 there right now. So let's change the capacity to 2. So now we can run 2 parts at a time, each part requiring 1 worker. And I'm going to, I'm going to adjust now this parking queue on the input node of the server. So the built-in, there's sort of this built-in parking queue, and I think this is a feature that maybe is not common or not widely known about, but there's this built-in parking queue. So when I select that input node and hover, I can see automatically animate the objects located in the parking station contents queue. If you wish to animate the objects somewhere else, turn off this option and use the draw queue option instead. So we're going to do just that. You see it's sort of gray when it's turned on. When it's turned off, it looks like the rest of the buttons on the ribbon. And I'm going to use the Q button to animate parking station dot contents. And I'm going to draw this sort of just above the work area. We'll move our labels a little bit out of the way. And I'm going to use the oriented point option for this queue, so I can control not only the position of, in this case, the workers in that queue, but also their orientation. So now we have a detached parking station where our workers will sit and sort of face the workstation as they're working. Another thing I want to point out is this visibility ribbon. So we'll run the model in a second and see that result. But another thing you can do is if you feel that the queues are detracting value from sort of the look and feel or other things like nodes, you can sort of toggle anything that you want on and off from the visibility ribbon. And sort of aptly named, it really just affects the appearance. You're not changing the physical or logical behavior of the nodes or the queues. You're just sort of masking them from the facility view. So we'll leave them on for now. But now we'll run the model and see. Kind of cool that our workers really now sort of stand in the queue facing the equipment. So that can be a really nice way, and especially as you get into kind of custom object development, you could save that object with that queue configuration and sort of rapidly scale up your model. You know, if there were 10 lathes, you wouldn't have to do those clicks for each one. Save this off as a custom object, and then you can sort of replicate it rapidly or efficiently. All right, so we're making some good progress. Another thing I want to mention is that these animated symbols have assignable actions, or we call them animations. So if you really want to get into detail as to what your workers are doing, maybe during different steps in a task sequence or at different work areas, you have these options that are assignable. And if you have questions or would like to elaborate on this, but you can do it in process logic with an assigned step using these indices to create sort of different actions for those animated workers. All right. So next, I want to point out that if you toggle the H key on your keyboard, you'll see sort of a number of these camera control or sort of lens control options. And there's a full help document on this with a complete list of these options. And I'll cover some of them as we go along. But for example, one thing you can do while the model's running is use the R key on your keyboard to create sort of this rotating view. So that may be a nice way to give kind of a bird's eye while you're starting your presentation or at some point. Okay, so next I want to talk about a feature that I use a lot and I think is a really good feature, this idea of saved views. So from the views ribbon, I have this category of buttons for named views. What you can do essentially is once you've gotten your camera angled to a good position and you're seeing some of those toggles in real time, so I can hold control, I can hold the control key and sort of move up and down and on this axis, right? Once I've got it somewhere that I like, I can add this as a named view. I'll call it 3D upstream, and give it a hotkey on my keyboard. So then I can sort of rapidly navigate through the model. And I typically like to do sort of a 2D overview as well. So we'll add a 2D overview. I'll map this to the O key on my keyboard. And now I can sort of seamlessly jump around between those two views. And I know sometimes over the screen share, this is going to go a little laggy, but hopefully it looks as clean on your end as it does on mine. But when you set this up, you'll see it's a pretty smooth transition. There's no limit to how many you can add there. And there's a nice companion feature to that where you can define a sequence of those moves. So you can create, sequence test with its own hotkey, and essentially what you do is specify the durations that you'd like to present each of those named views or some sequence of those named views that you've defined. So in this case, we would spend, right, if I gave this a hotkey like P, when I hit the P stroke on the keyboard, I would spend 5 seconds on this view and 5 seconds on the next. So it won't look like much with just two views. It'll sort of look like what we were just doing before, but you'll see that it sort of transitions from one view to another, which can be pretty nice. Maybe if you want to make a recording, I think that would be sort of a really nice feature, in sync with your talk track. You can spend as much time as you want in one area and then have the camera sort of automatically move to another area using that camera sequence feature. And next, we are going to do a bit more with adding, importing 3D symbols. So we'll tee up sort of two scenarios here. I want to bring in a CAD floor plan, like a 2D floor plan, maybe a DWG file or a DXF file. So we'll do that first. And I also want to make this combiner look more like a palette wrapper, sort of a palletizing area. Now, we'll imagine for the floor plan that I already have a file on hand. So we'll assume that we have a file. And to bring it in, I'm going to go to Drawing, Import Symbol, and navigate to the folder where I have it. And I'll select that building footprint, DWG in this case. And maybe if you know more about CAD than I do, you might mess around with these options. I almost always just leave the default settings there, hit OK, and we'll see that import occur. And then I get this nice dialog to establish the dimensions of that symbol. So this is a great way, I think, to start your project, because already you set this to scale, and then you have sort of a clear canvas to build your objects on. So I won't spend a ton of time here to get this too perfect, but we'll just set up the racking sort of near the shipping area and say that this is good enough for now. And another feature that I want to mention is that when you bring this in, it's sort of right on the origin and actually the y-axis in Simio. So the axes in Simio are X to the left and right, Z up and down, Y you can think of as into or out of the screen as the y-axis, or in 3D, is sort of up or down. So when I bring this in, it's on sort of 0Y, so it can compete with other things, especially in 2D. When I try to click on other things that lay flat on the grid, it can sort of compete with those clicks. So what we're going to do is go into 3D and hold the Shift key on my keyboard and just lower this slightly below the grid. And the more sort of opaque that it is, you'll be able to see the grid lines actually going over it. Now, we'll just lower it slightly on that y-axis, and then you can lock edits. So now I can click around and that symbol will no longer move as I click the mouse and move on it. And now in 2D, I can comfortably select other things that are sitting there right on the grid. All right, so we've got our floor plan, and next we want to enhance our combiner to make it look sort of more like a pallet wrapper, palletizing area. And again, maybe, you know, some customers that I work with have CAD groups within their organization, so they can outsource, you know, creation of 3D symbols. Some customers already have a nice library of them, but we'll imagine in this case, you know, we don't have a pallet wrapper symbol. So there's a really nice resource online that's free. We can use 3D Warehouse by SketchUp. And in this case, we'll search for a pallet wrapper, navigate to the models tab there, and we can download, you know, a free symbol online pallet wrapper. So I've already done that, and what we're going to do now is select our combiner to import a custom symbol. So we're moving out of that standard built-in symbol library. We're bringing in our own custom pallet wrapper. Give this the right size, and select OK. Now, if you ever want to, you know, change that geometry, so maybe we have, you know, several pallet wrappers and you want its default geometry to be a different size, you can go back. And I want to mention this because it's a little bit sort of buried here in the navigation window. You know, a lot of our clicks are on the ribbons or sort of the tabs in the home screen. But when it comes to symbols, you can select sort of the project here from the navigation window, go to symbols, or you'll see them here on the side. So navigation window is sort of our hub. And then you can select that symbol, edit symbol, and edit its specific geometry to, you know, sort of resize those initial dimensions if you need to. We'll go back to the model. And our next step will be to adjust, again, some of these attached cues to sort of further bring this area to life. So I'm going to bring the processing contents cue down and sort of center it on the base of our pallet wrapper. Bring the output node sort of over to the right. Maybe we'll make this more like a sort of staging area. And I'm going to bring my input buffer onto the conveyor. So let's see what we did, see if we made any mistakes. I feel okay about it so far. We'll speed things up a little bit, see if we can start building some pallets. So you see there being built up gradually in that area where the pallets are staged. Then we're ready to wrap. They move sort of onto the deck and then take off. So really, without doing a lot, I mean, we've really, you know, nicely enhanced the look of this area. I mean, now this looks fairly realistic just by doing a little bit there. Maybe what we'll do while we're here is add another view. We'll call this pallet wrap and give it the X key on my keyboard. All right, great. This next feature is really sort of fun, but what we'll do is select our forklift. And this feature applies to anything that moves about through the model. So you just workers, entities, or vehicles in this case. And what we're going to do while the model is actually running is right-click and toggle this trackable with camera option. It's already toggled on, but if it were off, it would look like this. We'll toggle it on. And now we can use these camera tracking options. And I just think this is really cool. And again, maybe not sort of widely known. Give this a second to run until our forklift does its first move, and then we'll look at the different options for sort of tracking along with this object. I saw a really cool model of you know, sort of roller coaster that, you know, actually sort of took you on a ride by following behind the entities. So you can use follow behind, you know, watch from a distance. I'm gonna try that one so I know how to look. Oh, pretty cool too. So yeah, really like these features, and you can switch between different objects. So that one's just sort of a fun, nice to have feature as well, that maybe you didn't know about. All right, good deal. So we'll use our hotkey to zoom back to 2D. And next we're going to do a bit more with static symbols. So I think you'll enjoy this. What we're going to do is bring our products down here a little bit. we're going to create a little more runway in server 1, this sort of server 1 area. So we'll bring this down, just create a little bit more space for ourselves. Put the home node for the workers sort of over here, the worker instance, I can kind of stash somewhere else on the side just to get them out of the way. And instead of just the triangle, right, I'm now going to import another symbol for my entity. So I go to Symbols ribbon, import symbol, and we're now going to build airplane wings. And you can see, a bit more of what I can do here. I can sort of rotate it. I can stand it up along either axis. I want to have just sort of the flat side facing up in this case. And again, none of this is set in stone. You could always go back and sort of adjust if you need to. So we are also going to add some scaffolding. So this will be our first, what I call sort of a static symbol. Well, actually, our floor plan was our first static symbol. So we'll be adding another static symbol, meaning that it's not attached to, it has no intelligence, so to speak, right? So Simio, simulation with intelligent objects. A lot of what we've done so far is, animated a server. And in doing so, we haven't changed its behavior. Its intelligence still has the same brain, but we've given it a different outfit, right? The static symbols are purely aesthetic. They have no function in the model. They're just a symbol. I'll show you how we can always sort of tell whether something we're looking at is an object or not. But first, we're going to bring in this scaffolding. We'll give it sort of a made up, say 5 meters. Bring this in. And you'll notice that when I click on that symbol, I don't see any properties. And that's how I can sort of tell the difference. There's no object type next to that properties indicator, whereas the servers say properties of server object. So next, what we're going to do is again animate the parking queue, but with a bit more flair. So I'll add a parking station .contents queue sort of here. We'll do oriented point again. We're going to face the server and add another vertex. So note that when you do this oriented point queue, if you had more than, in this case, 3 things in the queue, you wouldn't see them. So when you do this type of queue, you have to be sort of mindful to add enough vertices as there could be, maximum number of things in that queue, or you won't see them. So if there are more than 3 there, we wouldn't see them. And I need to adjust a bit on my task sequence. I want to say that 3 workers are required for these tasks. We're going to need to add some more workers so they can keep up. So we're doing a bit of modeling here as well, just some quick changes. We'll say that there's 5 workers, should be enough. All right. And now what I want to do is sort of move this whole queue up in 3D. So I do that by holding the shift key, sort of moving it up and down in 3D. I can do that for individual vertices as well. And then you may have guessed what we're going to do. I'm going to sort of place this on the scaffolding. So effectively what we're going to do is see our workers sort of standing on the scaffolding, which will be pretty neat. I'm sort of purposefully going to skip one step and we can see what happens. So interestingly enough, right, we see our workers, servers sees, but where's the part? Looks like we're not doing anything. So another feature to be aware of, and this tricked me a few times, is that you may need to resize your processing queue or your input buffer, right? So as you make things bigger, as you make your entities bigger, they can get sort of hidden in those default queue sizes. So just make sure as you make things larger, you also increase the size of queues to accommodate them. So now, again, just sort of a silly example here, mainly to show you the capabilities. Maybe while we're here, we'll save a view. And we'll say, plane wing with C. But yeah, some really nice features there. I mean, you could imagine you could take this, perfectionists could take this to sort of the nth degree, just by knowing how to work with these queues, bring in static symbols. You can do a lot to sort of mimic the real appearance of the system. And already we've got a pretty nice model here. I mean, remember where we started? We've done a lot to make this feel more realistic, more engaging. Okay, last one's kind of a bonus. I'm not sure that it's purely an animation feature, but I just think it's pretty neat and definitely can affect the appearance. So bear with me for a second here. When I do this, we're going to auto create links. We're going to auto create a link with vertices with our goal of creating sort of a curved travel path or a travel arc. And you could do this manually, but you'll see why auto creating has its benefits. It's more efficient, easier to maintain and scale. So to do this, we're going to get rid of path 3. You're gone. And add a new data table. Call this table links. And I'm going to add an object property column and 2 node property columns. So I'll call this link name, start node, with a lowercase t, please, and end node. Make this a primary key to indicate that it's a unique identifier, or the entries in that column are unique identifiers. If you've done auto create before, you know that we have this special type of column that I could add to this table to specify object types, like these 4 rows should auto create a server specified there, or basically for each row auto create the type of object specified in that special column. If I did that, I would map this entry to that column name, but for now I'm just going to say that everything in this table is going to be a path. And to actually do it, I need to map the properties of this column to the other columns in the table, and I do that with just the column name syntax. Since I'm sort of within this table, I don't have to do table name.column name. It recognizes that I'm sort of looking within this table for this information. And let's see what happens. So I usually start with, I'll sort of start typing into the cell to get close to what I want. Then maybe I'll use the arrow keys on my keyboard to finish it out. And voila, once I give it a starting node and an ending node, it is created between them automatically. It's really the benefit of doing this is that you could be sort of clever, or maybe write some code to build out rather large networks pretty easily. Maybe you're modeling a warehouse and you want to model your transportation lanes and your different travel paths throughout the warehouse. You could sort of automate this data creation if you write some code or do something sort of clever, maybe in Excel with a macro. And to take this one step further, so we talked about this idea of a curved path. We're going to add a table called table vertices with a foreign key property and 2 real properties that I'll call X and Z. We'll give these units of meters. And we'll call this link name as well. I tend to give my foreign key columns the same name as their primary key. Now remember that a foreign key is many mapped back to 1. So sort of like for each link, I'm going to define potentially several vertices. And to do that, I need one more sort of mapping here. Now that I'm going to another table, I need the table name.column name syntax that we're using here. Okay. So now I'm telling the auto-created paths to sort of reference this other table for their vertices. Finally, I need to set up my foreign key with the primary key table key property. And now when I drop that in, the default values there, 0, 0. I get this vertice sort of over by the origin. And then what you could do, in this case, we'll just sort of copy paste a handful of them. Maybe start to give them some offset there. And then sort of click and drag, and you see the coordinates in the table update as well. So pretty neat. If you have any sort of curved conveyance, maybe there's like an obstacle there that you want to avoid, you can do that through auto create. And remember that when you auto create, you need to sort of come back and reconfigure. Unless you're auto creating a custom object that has saved non-default. So basically what I'm saying is before I deleted this and recreated it, it was a bidirectional path. So now that I've auto created it, I need to go back and set it to bidirectional. I could also save this as a custom path, create object from this, so that each custom path is created with bidirectional automatically. If you have questions about that or you're not familiar with that, just reach out to us. It's generally called subclassing objects or custom objects, really great features as well. So let's see, can I remember the hotkey? We want X for sort of our palette wrapper area. We'll bring the data tab back in, and let's see how we did. So once we build some palettes, we'll see the conveyor, or the forklift now sort of travel on this curved arc. So pretty cool. I mean, you could really do a lot with this. And again, it's in 3 dimensions. So if you had some sort of spiraling conveyance, maybe coming down from one floor to another, you could do that all by just sort of getting the coordinates right. Or again, doing something clever with code or Excel to generate that data. All right, and we're getting pretty close to close here. Just a few sort of bonus topics. Another thing you can do is use the skybox feature from the views ribbon to add a backdrop. In this case, we'll add a warehouse backdrop. And again, just remember that you have a lot of those options to control sort of the look and feel. So, control, scroll on my scroll wheel will go up and down like that. Shift and scroll will sort of take me up towards the roof. So that can be pretty neat, or back down to earth. And remember that, we didn't cover today, sort of animation, status labels, and charts, because Kiara will be covering that in our next solution series. But hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you can apply these techniques to some of your models to really make them sing. For now, that's all I got for you. We'll just mention, for further learning, reach out to us. We've got good training resources online, also good help documentation in the software, so that auto creating paths, for instance, is a symbit. So if you wanted a refresher on that, search the help doc, search the symbits for auto create paths with vertices. So a lot of good resources for you there for further learning. And that's a wrap for what I have planned. So we'll be happy to address any questions now. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. So there are a bunch of questions. Let's see how many we can get through here. And if for some reason we do not address your question, I apologize if we ran out of time. I will put our email addresses back up at the end of this session just in case. All right, so let's start off with some of this came in as you were presenting. So Adam, how do you access attached animations versus standalone animations?
Good question. So we'll go back to Simio, and what you'll see with the attached animations to, so just definitions, right? Attached means that I've selected an object first and then applied animation to that object. So it's attached to that object. And when you ask how do you access them, well, sort of by selecting that object again, checking out the symbols ribbon, you can see that how it appears for the different resource states. So sometimes what I'll do is if I have failures, I'll sort of further manipulate that attached symbol. So I'll switch to, off shift or that failed state, and then maybe add some coloration, sort of like the default server, right? So the default server turns green when it's processing. So if you wanted to, further, let's make sure it works. So the short answer for attached is by selecting that object again, right? Now the symbol is just a symbol. So the symbols I can access from the navigation window to resize them, do whatever. The static symbols, again, just by sort of clicking on them in the facility view, you can access them there. And to create them, you just click in free space from the drawing ribbon. You import that as a static symbol, like our floor plan and like our scaffolding. So hopefully that gives some clarification, addresses your question.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. And the questions are coming in hot and heavy now, so I'm hopefully we'll get through all of them, but we'll see. One question that did come in that I will be able to answer. The question was, are we going to have a recording available of this? The answer is yes. There will be a recording available of this entire session. It will be on the Simio webpage, so simio.com. we usually have it up within about 24 hours. So if you ask the question about the recording, you should be able to see it hopefully within the next 24 hours. All right, let's go on to some of the other questions. Adam, can you have a path speed column as well? So like if different entities use the same path, they reference that column to see what speed they should move.
Yeah, awesome question. Getting on to what we call data-driven modeling. And the answer is absolutely yes. So a nice way to think about these auto-create tables is like each row is sort of analogous to the instance of that object. So a non-data driven model, we're hard coding stuff on these objects. We're saying the speed limit of this path is 3, the speed limit of this path is 5. But then I don't really have that in front of me. I did also want to mention the properties spreadsheet, which is a nice way to get that in front of you in sort of a tabular view. So now I can see sort of all my paths. I can also use this to multi-select things. So if you have an action you want to do on all your servers or objects of a certain type, I want to mention the property spreadsheet. I think this may not be well known. But a data-driven model, I'm going to say create, a real column, speed, limit, and I'll try and be sort of expeditious here about my answers. But you can map those properties. When you do that, you need to make sure to also set auto set table row reference to true. Best way I can describe this feature is that when you establish this reference column, it's like a pointer to that object. It's a one-way street. This is pointing at path 3. Now for path 3 to get something back from that table, it needs to know which row we're talking about. So that feature automatically establishes for that path object that created a reference back to this row. So then it will read its speed from the table and any other attributes that you want to map to that table as well. Recommended best practice data-driven modeling for sure. Great question.
All right, next. Adam, what are the file types supported for what are the file types supported for importing external symbols, whether they be 2D or 3D?
Yep, so you've got a slew of them, and you can always refer to this import dialog, right? So other common ones are step files, might come from a SolidWorks, stereolithograph, STL files I've seen before. So shortest answer possible there is go to drawing, place symbol import. This drop down here will give you the complete list of supported file types. And usually the CAD tools give you an option to convert. So if something you're working with maybe isn't one of these, you can usually export as or save it as one of these to convert into something. I usually prefer SketchUp if I can. I try to use SketchUp.
All right, perfect. All right, can you rotate symbols in all directions? For example, and this is just a simple example, could you flip a person on their head? In other words, can you rotate? So someone's doing a handstand, pulling something off of a rack, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a good question because I didn't really cover that. So you can rotate objects in the facility view here by grabbing a vertex and holding the control key. So obviously that's not really helping in this case, but you can do that. For yours specifically, right? So you'll notice that when I add even standard symbols from our built-in symbol library, they show up here as one that I've sort of added into my model. So yeah, you can absolutely go in, edit the geometry of that symbol, and if you wish to stand up along X or Z, looking pretty silly, but now we've got our person doing a handstand.
There you go.
So, yeah, absolutely. So just using those features.
All right, great. With a custom object, would you prefer to send a worker to an input node and animate the queue as you did, or add an additional node to the center of the lathe and just send the worker to that node directly?
Yes, good question. So I'll just talk about some considerations there. Either one is fine. I usually just use the input node because it's convenient. sometimes when it may be inconvenient is if you have logic, not necessarily inconvenient, just an extra step. If you have entered process logic on that input node, technically what happens when the worker comes over to park there is it enters the node as well and will try to execute that logic, but most likely you want this logic to just apply to your model entities. So you can mitigate that with just a simple check up front using this function called is.modelEntity. So when something, kicks off this logic that is not a model entity, it will basically just false out. So to avoid this, you could, yes, add a node. And let me show you how you would do that for others on the call. So let's create a custom object from this. We'll call it my lathe. Head inside that object's definition from the navigation window. You can go to the external view, and this is where you could further sort of pre-configure it, right? So maybe you want to add that parking station.contents. Maybe you want to add an external node. So I can add an external node right to your point and say that that's maybe a basic node, and then I could animate, the contents of that node, right? So I would type node 1 parking station contents here. So now when I pull my lathe, I've got this pre-configured object. So yeah, I think I don't feel strongly either way, but it's a good point that you can do this for those who maybe didn't know that. Good question.
All right, great. A few more here. We probably aren't going to get to all the questions, so if we don't get to your question, once again, I'll put our email addresses up there at the end. Adam, are you able to add properties to symbols to change the dimensions of unique instances of a symbol?
So let me make sure I understand the question. So I think you're referring to sort of the physical characteristics is how I interpret that question. So the physical characteristics, I would say, are best manipulated using either that property spreadsheet, right? So if you wanted to resize your rack objects, sort of in bulk, you could do that through the property spreadsheet. You do have as well, right, if you're auto creating them, sort of initial physical characteristics, right? So yes, sort of similar to what we've done with the other attributes, you could initialize those physical characteristics from data table columns. So yes, you probably want to be auto creating your objects if you're looking to do that, initialize those physical characteristics from data, and here is where you would establish that. Yeah, good one.
All right, let's make this our last question because I think this might be a little bit of a longer answer, but let's see. Suppose there are many entities in a queue, and each individual entity has many attributes. In this case, can Simio only show entities that have a certain attribute?
Yeah, that's a neat question. So what you can do is makes me think of the visibility expression options. So one thing I've done before, right, is if I have like a mix, I've got my labels all confused because I switched to custom lathe, but let's say you had a mix in this input buffer, and I want to add a few more. So let me do input buffer dot contents. So now I have 2 input buffers, and we'll imagine maybe I can go to this one where my building the model test. Bear with me for a sec. All right. Yeah, so I wanted to just be able to run it so we can actually see this. So we'll add that queue again, input buffer.contents. And I want to remind myself what I think you should see is now duplicates, right? So there's not 4 entities, really just 2 entities, but I've created sort of a copy by just copying this queue. But yeah, absolutely, you could use this visibility expression. So my whole point here is if you want blue ones, to show in one queue. The queue is logical in the sense, right, that it has a capacity. So it has like a logical capacity, but it can also be sort of physically representative of like a staging area when we put the queue on the conveyor over here. So maybe you've got lanes in front of the server where you're slotting different products. Make a few copies of the queue, use the visibility expression here, and just take note of the tooltip for sort of the how-to, right? For example, the expression candidate, my entity, my state, greater than 1 will only show the blue ones, or only show the green ones, right? And I think maybe I could do like candidate is default entity. And but you get the idea there. Yes, you can do that. And I've done it before using that visibility expression.
Okay. All right, actually, one more quick one, Adam. Can you put labels on the XZ axis?
On the XZ axis. Yeah, so the XZ axis is sort of the flat, right? So this, technically is a label on the XZ axis, but if we're talking about the Y sort of going up in 3D, let me show you another thing that I've done before in models. So, when you go into 3D, you can't really see that so well anymore, that floor label. What you can do from the drawing ribbon is give it some height. You have to sort of mess around with this to get it right. If you want it to be sort of rectangular, right? So now I've got that.
There you go.
Label with some height.
Perfect.
Pretty cool. Great questions. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for your questions. Let me grab presenter back here, Adam, real quick, and just bring our email addresses up. So there you go. So just to end here, there's our email addresses. If we did not get to one of your questions today, please feel free to reach out to either Adam or myself, and we will get the answers back to you. If you are watching this session on record and there's something that you'd like to ask us, you've got our information right here. Once again, top left corner is that QR code. If you don't mind just doing a quick click on that and filling out a survey just so we know how we're doing. And then lastly, just to wrap up here, the next 2 sessions, Wednesday, October 4th, Wednesday, November 8th. Chart Designer, Adam referenced that a few times today, things you're gonna see in a little less than a month, and then Wednesday, November 8th for the DDMRP presentation. So we are out of time. Thanks everyone for attending today. It looks like our Wednesday attendance was definitely a little bit greater than our normal Friday attendance, so maybe Wednesday might be the day to have this. But once again, the survey, if you could fill it out, that would help us out a ton, knowing where we should go forward. Thanks again for your time today, and we will see you hopefully in less than a month. Thanks all. Goodbye.